Hey, some important people missing from today's provincial COVID update because of a COVID scare at Queen's Park. The Premier and the Health Minister are being tested for COVID-19. This comes after the Education Minister learned he'd been in contact with a confirmed case. Let's go live to our Queen's Park reporter, Mike Crawley. And Mike, this news developed rapidly this afternoon.
Yeah, Dwight, we were about 1 minute away from the start of Premier Doug Ford's daily scheduled COVID-19 briefing when we suddenly got a statement from the Premier's office, and it was announcing that Doug Ford and Health Minister Christine Elliott were that they would not actually be at this briefing. And the reason that was given is that a contact of Education Minister Stephen Lecce had tested positive for COVID-19. Now, Stephen Lecce had spent 40 minutes with Ford and Elliott in that room during yesterday's news conference. The statement said that Lecce had been tested yesterday after that news conference and that he was still waiting for his results. It also said in the statement that the Premier and the Health Minister would get tested too. So yes, quite an abrupt surprise, and it meant there was only one cabinet minister available today to answer any questions about what was going on. This was the Minister for Colleges and Universities.
I actually just learned about this a matter of minutes before coming up to the podium, so I certainly can't speak to what anybody else is thinking. I could tell you that I know our Premier is acting out of an extreme abundance of caution, and he wants to ensure that everyone on the premises here at Queen's Park is safe.
Now then, just as Ross Romano was finishing that news conference, another statement, this time from Stephen Lecce's office, and it said, quote, "I was informed minutes ago that my COVID-19 test results have come back negative." So clearly good news for Stephen Lecce. He got his result in a day. People from his office say that his tests were not expedited in any way and that it's typical that people get the results in 24 hours, we're told. Now, despite testing negative, despite that negative test for Stephen Lecce, the Premier's office said that Doug Ford and Christine Elliott were still getting tested anyway, and that they will make the results known to the public once they know.
Well, Mike, this comes a day after a member of the Premier's own family tested positive for COVID.
Yeah, that's Toronto City Councillor Michael Ford. He put out a statement last night announcing that he had tested positive for COVID-19, that he was in good health and was self-isolating at home. We are told by the Premier's staff that Doug Ford has not had any contact with Michael Ford over the past 14 days, the past couple of weeks. We're also told that the Premier and his cabinet ministers are practicing all of those things about physical distancing that everybody in Ontario is supposed to be practicing right now. Dwight?
Thank you for this, Mike. More on that announcement from Ross Romano. He announced limited in-person instruction is being allowed to resume in Ontario's post-secondary schools.
We are announcing here today a framework to reopen the post-secondary sector in Ontario, and that will begin as early as July 2nd of this year.
The first phase of the plan will accommodate students who weren't able to graduate due to the pandemic. In September, all students will have the opportunity to attend post-secondary either virtually, in class, or through a combination of both. There will be limits on the number of students on campus. The province says it will release a list of health and safety protocols in the coming days. There is more fallout tonight from the decision to allow childcare centers across the province to reopen on Friday. Some operators say the few days' notice they got isn't enough time to open for business safely again. Lorenda Redekop visited one center in Toronto to get a sense of the challenges involved in getting ready.
At this private childcare center along the Danforth, the owners are now looking at everything that will have to be changed.
This is one of our toddler rooms. So we'll have to separate out their cubbies and where things are placed. Toys changed around, things relabeled, things put away. We only got the protocols at 11:30 last night.
This room used to have 26 kids. Now it'll be 8 plus 2 staff.
All the rugs will have to be removed. We have a lot of wood because That's part of our philosophy, is to have natural products and natural textures and just keep that atmosphere very calm. But unfortunately, a lot of those things will have to go, and it'll be the plastic and things that are easily sterilized.
She's a former musician, struggling with one part of the guidelines.
We've been told no singing inside, and I mean, we do that all day long. I never stop singing. I walk into a room singing, and I start singing with me, and we start doing things. And so we'll have to do that outside. So I guess we're going to go outside a lot and sing, because I'm certainly not going to have no singing in the center.
And there are costs.
There is a wage subsidy for a certain period of time that will help with that. Everything that we use in the center has tripled in price. A box of gloves that was $3 is now $9 or $10, for example. We go through hundreds of gloves every single day.
One parent has 2 kids here, including her 4.5-year-old son, who's special needs. Like in many households, she and her husband are talking about it.
My son's going to be going to school in September, so that was a huge factor because we want him to get some socialization, so he's not going from isolation for 5 months to school. So we landed on, we're going to see how the numbers go the next 2 to 3 weeks.
The center says the earliest they could possibly open would be July 2nd.
We need assistance, we need clear guidelines, we need time, we need messages put out that are reflect reality. No, we can't open on Friday.
Lorenda Redicop, CBC News, Toronto.
The city of Brampton is starting to ease pandemic restrictions. The mayor announcing today that parks will start to open tomorrow.
This will include open shade, picnic shelters, benches, leash-free dog parks, the White Spruce Park disc golf course, and skate parks. I would note this does not include playground and play structure, sports fields, amenities, outdoor fitness equipment, outdoor swimming pools, splash pads, wading pools, washrooms, or drinking water systems. They still remain closed within the parks.
Brampton is one of the last regions in the GTA to make this move. Although 500 parks will be reopening, there will be strict enforcement of physical distancing. Over the weekend, the city gave out a record number of fines to people who were not following distancing rules. Bylaw officers busted 24 house parties, 4 parking lot gatherings, and a hair salon that was operating against provincial emergency rules. To try and get more people tested, the city ran a pop-up testing site at the Gore Meadows Community Center today. It was Peel Region's first pop-up site as the health unit looks at expanding testing as much as possible, hoping to do over 1,000 tests per day. 83 Brampton residents have died of COVID-19 so far, with more than 2,700 residents contracting the virus. Now, the city of Mississauga is planning on hosting their first pop-up testing center at the Malton Community Center on Friday. Cases in that part of the GTA are stabilizing, so the city is starting to reopen more spaces for residents.
We approved a plan to reopen our weekly Lions Club Farmers Market and the food trucks at Celebration Square. I know many are missing spending time in our beautiful Celebration Square with their family and their friends. And while things won't be completely back to normal this year, we're very pleased to be doing what we can to inject some energy back into Celebration Square.
Both food trucks and the farmers market will have to operate with physical distancing rules. Food trucks will be required to use a food app so customers can order in advance and pick up their food when it's ready. The city is hoping this will be in place by the end of June. The mayor says the city is also hoping their summer camps will be able to run starting in July if their COVID numbers continue to decline. Toronto Mayor John Tory says summer in this city is not canceled. City camps will be opening starting July 13 for children aged 6 to 12. Spots will, of course, be limited due to social distancing guidelines. Details on the camps and how to register will be posted on the city's website this weekend. Meanwhile, city-run pools could soon open.
This is our plan to give residents access to outdoor aquatic amenities, including swimming beaches, outdoor and wading pools, and splash pads.
Crews are preparing hundreds of pools, splash pads, and other water amenities, but they won't be available until Toronto enters phase 2 of the province's reopening plan. That could happen as early as next Friday. Now, pool and hot tub store owners say business has increased dramatically as families are stuck at home this summer, wanting to create their own backyard staycation oasis. Angelina King has more on the booming business.
This is the lovely pool that we purchased. It is not large, but it definitely does the trick.
When the pandemic started forcing closures back in March, Diana Friedland had a feeling her family's summer wouldn't be the same.
I just had the foresight that a lot of things will be canceled, including possibly camp, and I went online and bought a pool.
With the city's 60 outdoor pools and 150 splash pads still closed and summer activities and sports canceled, the pool has been a great way for her sons to keep busy and cool. They're grateful they got it when they did, because now pools are hard to come by. Many are sold out online, and they've seen the same pool they bought being resold for $500 more than what they paid.
Almost like scalping hockey tickets. It was like people are scalping pools.
Several pool and hot tub stores in the GTA told us that they're a lot busier this year, with a lot of customers coming in wanting to create that backyard oasis while they have to stay home.
Every one of these tubs is sold.
The store's general manager says they're being strategic with ordering supply, but still it'll likely take a couple months to get your hands on a new hot tub.
We're definitely seeing a spike in those new customers as well, and spending more money in the backyard for sure.
Over in Oakville, the manager of this store says by May they had already sold a season's worth of above-ground pools. Now they're practically sold out, and most models aren't available until next summer.
Not just us, our suppliers are sold out. The suppliers of our suppliers are sold out. In my 52 years, I've never seen anything like it.
It's going to be a hot summer, especially for those who live in apartments and condos like Lauren Cherry Turk. She'd usually be taking her son and his older sister to the nearby Ledbury Park pool or a splash pad.
We pretty much spent every single day there.
So she posted in an online community group, joining a small chorus of others asking to rent a backyard pool this summer. In the meantime, she's hoping the city opens pools and splash pads before summer is over, and if not,
taking advantage of as many patches of grass away from people that I possibly can.
Angelina King, CBC News, Toronto.
Need to get that little guy to a splash pad, Colin. I've been hearing about watches and warnings all afternoon. Anything for our region?
Yeah, they're just starting to encroach on us here, Dwight. So I'll show you what's going on. We know that we have the heat warning when we're talking about the temperatures we've been seeing. Our temperature today going up to about 32 degrees, but the humidex value at 41, which is a new record for us. So we're still into the heat warning. These are my concerns, though, now where I'm really turning my attention. So all the areas you see in yellow, that's a severe thunderstorm watch. The city of Toronto over towards York, Durham, not included yet. I anticipate these will be extended by Environment Canada to those areas. But more importantly, what's in red here, these are severe thunderstorm warning areas. So that's where we have storms that are occurring, that are severe, or it is imminent that they're moving in. And you can certainly see that line stretching from beyond Parry Sound all the way back towards the Windsor area. If we go in for a closer look in a moment here, you'll see what I'm talking about, some of the signatures with these storms. But these are the lightning strikes as well associated with them. But beyond the lightning strikes, torrential downpours, and you can anticipate with these some very strong winds, those wind gusts exceeding 100 kilometers an hour. This is time to take in any plants you need to, any of your outdoor furniture and things like that that can blow away. But kind of watching these very carefully to see what develops through here, because there is that risk we could get into tornadic activity when we have storms this strong. These will continue tracking from west to east, so they are headed towards the GTA as that cold front undercuts that very buoyant air. So in the next couple of hours, as we're getting closer to 8 and through that corridor towards 10, we'll be watching these pass through the city, and I'll be telling you more about that coming up, Dwight.
We will see you in a bit. Thank you, Colette.
You're welcome.
The weather is brought to you by Trane, the most reliable heating and cooling brand. We test, so it runs. Take advantage of special offers now. It's hard to stop a train.
It has been 2.5 years since Tess Ritchie's disappearance and murder in downtown Toronto. Today, her family filed a lawsuit against her killer and the Toronto police, seeking compensation for what's being described as psychological devastation resulting from the murder. Alicia Son has more.
How does a healthy, vibrant 22-year-old woman go missing, murdered by a stranger, left in the bottom of a stairwell, not to be found by police, but her own mother?
I've called it the perfect storm from the very beginning.
From the bar, they allege she was overserved.
The coach that person, just give her whatever coach she says is hers and get her out of here.
To the staircase she and Schlater walked to, which they feel should have had lights and been blocked off.
They tried to say that they weren't constructing there. That's why, legally, they didn't have to cordon it off.
To the Toronto police.
Had the police simply done their job, a lot of mental anguish could have been prevented.
The Ritchie family has filed a $20 million lawsuit that names the nightclub, the property where she was killed, the Toronto police, and Kalen Schlater himself. He'll be 46 years old after he's done serving his 25-year prison sentence.
The civil suit is aimed at holding him accountable for the significant damage done to this family. So when he gets out of jail, he can expect that we'll be waiting and looking to hold him accountable for the rest of his life.
The statement of claim also alleges the village was a blind spot for the police, the same area serial killer Bruce McArthur could prowl for years without being caught.
And don't get me wrong, Kalen Schlater is the one to blame for what happened here, but others share the blame.
Maybe Schlater would not have felt like that was a neighborhood he could not have behaved that way in.
None of the claims have been tested in front of a judge. The Toronto police declined to comment because the matter is now before the courts. But they say 2 officers are facing charges under the Police Services Act relating to the initial search for Tess Ritchie.
When Tessa's life was taken, the world lost because that girl was going places. She was important.
Legacy leads to change.
Tessa's mom and her sisters do not want her death to be in vain and hope the perfect storm clears.
That's what we want her legacy to be, is exactly that.
Yeah, change.
Ali Chiasson, CBC News, Toronto.
Police have now released the name of a man who was shot and killed last night in a park near Leslie in Eglinton. As the search continues now for the suspects, Greg Ross has more on the city's 32nd homicide of the year.
Police have identified 20-year-old Maz Jogiat of Toronto as the man who was killed in a shooting yesterday evening at Leonard Linton Park. He was one of 2 victims. Saman Esafani says he was in the park with his wife and daughter and heard multiple gunshots.
I just called for my daughter, and my wife grabbed my daughter and ran to my friend's house.
While many were trying to escape the park, Eleni McDonald ran into it, hoping to help. She says she found one of the victims being attended to by a man in a skateboard park.
The gentleman who was tending to him told me he was okay. I believed he was on the phone with 911 and told me to go to the other guy.
McDonald says she found the second man laying here in the street not far from a silver minivan that had been riddled with bullets. She says she tried to help save the man's life along with a few other people.
I ended up tying a tourniquet around his shoulder.
She says that man was Jogiat. Moments later, emergency crews arrived.
Right before I went to go talk to the firemen who were getting out of their truck, I felt this gentleman for a pulse and I did not feel one. So I immediately ran to them and said, hurry, hurry, we have seconds. We just have to revive him and get going.
Jogiat was taken to a hospital on an emergency run where he later died. The second man was taken to a hospital and treated for minor injuries. The entire ordeal has taken quite a toll on this community.
This is the friendly neighborhood, and we do have kids here.
Police say the suspects were driving a dark-colored 4-door SUV, last seen heading northbound on Brentcliffe Road towards Eglinton Avenue. Greg Ross, CBC News, Toronto.
A vigil for Toronto rapper Houdini, who was shot and killed downtown 2 weeks ago, ended last night with more gun violence.
When officers arrived on scene, the rear parking lot was clearing out of patrons, and our officers located in excess of 30 shell casings in the back.
Officers responded to the shooting outside a spa in the Jane and Wilson area. The 2 victims, a man in his 20s and a man in his 40s, took themselves to hospital. One is in serious condition. People were gathered on Beverly Hills Drive to remember DeMargio Jenkins, also known as Houdini. He was shot and killed on Blue Jays Way on May 26th. Police are asking for any witnesses of last night's shooting to come forward. A day after being laid to rest, George Floyd's brother made an emotional plea for change in Washington.
I couldn't take care of George that day he was killed, but maybe by speaking with you today, I can make sure that his death will not be in vain.
Philonis Floyd and many prominent Black Americans told the committee police must be held accountable when they do something wrong and trained properly on the use of force. The latest from D.C. coming up next. Less than 24 hours after George Floyd was laid to rest, members of his family were testifying before Congress in Washington. They added their voices to the calls for change. Today marked the first hearing for a proposed new Justice in Policing Act. The sweeping reforms were tabled this week in response to protests against systemic discrimination in law enforcement across the U.S. Lindsay Duncombe now with the details.
Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle acknowledged today that policing in the United States needs to change. The tone of this hearing was set by George Floyd's brother, Philonis Floyd.
I'm tired. I'm tired of pain. When you watch your big brother, who you looked up to for your whole life, die begging for his mom, I'm here to ask you to make it stop. Stop the pain. Stop us from being tired.
George Floyd's murder by Minneapolis police galvanized grief and anger over how Black Americans are treated by law enforcement. The purpose of the hearing was to debate sweeping legislation proposed by Democrats to address systemic racism. It would ban chokeholds, mandate anti-bias training, and create a database for officers accused of misconduct. Some Republicans suggested they could get on board with at least some of that.
I think that we can fine-tune elements to ensure that we don't defund the police, that we don't make our communities less safe. I do think there is not a legitimate defense of chokeholds or lynching or bad cops that get shuttled around, and you will be able to count on Republican cooperation as we hone these ideas.
The bill does not address the concept of defunding the police, but major U.S. cities have pledged to move police funding to community initiatives. Houston's police chief Art Azevedo warned that could make reforms more difficult to enact.
Appropriate police funding is critical to ensure agencies have resources to invest in technology like body-worn cameras, recruit qualified police officers who are service-minded, and train in implicit bias, train in cultural competency, train in de-escalation, and other critical training.
Any new legislation would have to pass the Democratic-controlled House of Representatives, the Republican-controlled Senate, and be signed off by the president. Donald Trump's often divisive tweets have largely focused on law and order. Lindsay Duncombe, CBC News, Washington.
As mass protests against police brutality continue across North America in the wake of George Floyd's death, the head of the RCMP said today the service will review its officers' use of a controversial neck hold restraint. The force is being asked some very tough questions about its actions, and Commissioner Brenda Lucki admits the Mounties have work to do. In an interview today with CBC's chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton, Lucki was asked directly about racism in the organization.
On Monday, Deputy Commissioner for Alberta, Curtis Zablocki, said he doesn't believe there's systemic racism in policing in Canada. Do you agree?
You know, we live in a society where inequalities persist, and police are part of that society. So we absolutely have the responsibility to examine the ways in which we, as an organization, can do better and look at racism within our organization.
I'm not sure you answered the question, though. Do you believe that there is systemic racism inside police organizations, including yours in the country?
That is an interesting question, because in the last couple of days, I've honestly heard about 15 or 20 definitions of systemic racism, and if it refers to an unconscious bias that exists, and we definitely have that in the RCMP, and we are not immune to it at all in any case. And there are times when our members don't act in accordance with our core values, which includes racism. And it's those times that we have to make sure that that doesn't happen.
You can see more of Rosemary Barton's interview with RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki tonight on The National. That's at 10 o'clock, right here on CBC Television. CBC News journalist Wendy Mesley is off the air pending an internal investigation. As Eli Glasner explains, it stems from a word she said in an editorial meeting, one she says she should have never used.
It's a show that bears her name, but this past Sunday, The Weekly with Wendy Mesley was without its host. Mesley was off the air after what the CBC calls an incident. On Twitter today, Mesley said, "In the context of an editorial discussion about current issues regarding race, I used a word that should never be used." She wrote, "I was quoting a journalist we were intending to interview. I hurt people, and I'm deeply sorry. I'm also deeply ashamed." Both the CBC and Mesley declined on-camera interviews. CBC said in a statement she is off air pending an investigation. Mesley says she's been asked to keep the process confidential.
I'm not sure why it is that after all these years, white journalists can't figure out there are just some words that you don't say in front of people.
Andre Demise is a contributing editor at Maclean's magazine. He says this is part of a larger issue of systemic racism in journalism, pointing to a series of missteps this week at CBC, including the airing of a video that focused on the police's perspective and, due to a technical error, omitted the final moments when the vehicle drove into protesters.
The footage we broadcast did not meet CBC's journalistic standards.
Admit you've got a problem. There, in our national broadcaster, there's a commitment to diversity, but there is no conversation around who makes the news, who's in front of the camera, who's behind the cameras.
Yesterday, CBC News' editor-in-chief outlined the steps it's taking, including half of new hires from underrepresented equity groups, training editorial teams to be more inclusive in guest selection, and unconscious bias training.
We've been having the same conversation since 2000.
But Demise is tired of waiting.
I can't even tell you the amount of panels that I've been invited to or the amount of discussions that I've been asked to take part in, where we do explore things like unconscious bias training, which is to me just an utter crock, where we do talk about having new hires come in from underrepresented communities. The problem is when you bring those hires in, there's a bulwark. They don't get far in the workplace.
Thanks so much for joining us.
It's not clear how long the investigation will take or when Mesley could be back on air. Eli Glasner, CBC News, Toronto.
The troops have arrived at yet another long-term care home in Ontario. When we come back, why older for-profit facilities are some of the hardest hit. Members of the Canadian Forces are now on scene at Woodbridge Vista Care Community. The long-term care home has been at the center of a deadly COVID-19 outbreak. It's now under the control of the Ministry of Long-Term Care. Families of residents at the home have been asking for the military's help. They claim Woodbridge Vista is overwhelmed by the outbreak and that some residents have been neglected as a result. 23 residents of the home have died from COVID-19. The Canadian military is also at long-term care homes in Quebec, and today the Liberals face questions about if they will commit to keeping those soldiers there as long as Quebec needs them.
We have assured Quebec that the Canadian Armed Forces will continue to provide support until such time as other trained professional people are able to do that job, that we will continue to provide that support until the middle of September, exactly as they have requested. But we are also working to ensuring that we have a sustainable, effective solution to the request that Quebec has made.
Canadian forces were first sent into the homes in April. The defense minister said last month it was not possible to keep up the tempo of that mission, working 7 days a week around the clock. More than 80% of all deaths due to COVID-19 in Quebec have been in long-term care homes. In Ontario, there have been outbreaks in more than 70 homes and more than 1,700 residents have died. An analysis of the numbers by CBC's Marketplace shows the hard-hit facilities tend to be older for-profit homes with residents 4 to a room. David Common has more.
When COVID struck the nursing home where Dillis Patterson's mom lived, she pulled her out fast, fearing how quickly the virus would spread in a tight room Joan shared with 3 others.
It just seemed like it'd be impossible to control that infection.
It was. 67 residents have now died at the home, and data analyzed by CBC Marketplace reveals how the buildings themselves may be connected to how deadly an outbreak becomes. 22 years ago, Ontario mandated new nursing home rooms house no more than 2 people, in large part to control infection. Everything from visitors to privacy curtains can spread viruses. But rooms that already had more than 2 beds have been long grandfathered in place. So now, about a third of Ontario's beds only meet a nearly 50-year-old standard. It is in those facilities where 57% of the deaths have occurred. Older buildings have a higher death toll, the vast majority of which are owned by for-profit companies. An association representing them says there is insufficient funding from government for renovations. But elder advocate Jane Meadis points out not-for-profit homes have upgraded faster than homes run by for-profit groups.
And frankly, there's no impetus for the homes to rebuild. They are full. They don't have to change in order to keep full.
Makes me wonder why it's been allowed to go on so long.
Dillis is now looking for a new home for her mom and has no interest in a 4-person room this time.
Now, that was David Common reporting from Mississauga. He also reports that there is little incentive for older, more crowded facilities to rebuild or renovate to meet modern standards. In Ontario alone, there are 37,000 people on waiting lists for spaces in long-term care homes. For the first time since mid-March, some TDSB students are being allowed back into their schools, but it's not to learn. They are picking up belongings left behind in the rush to close schools at the beginning of the pandemic. Talia Ricci explains.
Got my hand sanitizer.
This mom is ready for her appointment to pick up her kids' belongings before summer break.
They really miss their friends the most and that structure and that routine. It isn't the normal June that we're all accustomed to.
And this isn't what a school normally looks like in June either. Empty hallways, covered up drinking fountains, hats and mitts left behind, a reminder of how much time has passed since students have been in classrooms.
What kind of things have you left behind? I did leave like my textbook in my locker and like some shoes.
Glad you're wearing a mask. When you walk in there, there's hand sanitizer on your left.
Wexford Collegiate was one of a handful of schools that piloted this pickup plan before it rolled out across the school board this week.
Our model follows like the retail model. As if you would go to Metro or Walmart, we do the very same thing. And we've given each sort of grouping 45 minutes to get in, retrieve their belongings, drop off anything that belongs to the school, and off they go.
The Toronto District School Board says it's looking into several measures like PPE and physical distancing in the classrooms. But ultimately, they're waiting for direction from the Ministry of Education. They say they will be providing clarity on the plan for September by the end of June.
My biggest worry is that it won't be safe for the kids to come back to the classroom in September, and how that will impact parents who work outside the home.
And while there's a whole summer ahead, September is on the minds of students too.
Every day, that's the first thing I think pretty much when I wake up. It was nice though to be back in kind of the element that I'm used to, just a little weird to not have it be as noisy and like lively as it usually is, of course.
Talia Ricci, CBC News, Toronto.
When we come back, how even COVID-19 couldn't stop a next-door friendship.
Yay. Like when COVID-19 didn't happen, like if it was like a really warm day like today, we'd be like hanging out in the backyards together. So we can't really like we can do that.
While this pandemic can be isolating, two best friends have found a way to connect. The families of the 9-year-olds have created an outdoor window between their fences so the BFFs can still play together while in their own backyards.
Okay, so this is best of 5, the final round. Dun dun dun. Dun. Okay.
I got the idea to put a window in down the side of the fence where they can get really up close, nose to nose with each other and chat and see each other nice and close. I feel like children really need to physically be close together, you know, and just to read each other's eyes and expressions, and I don't know, I think it's just really important for their mental health to connect with their peers physically, not just on a tablet.
This is fun. Hug. Yay. Like when COVID-19 didn't happen, like if it was like a really warm day like today, we'd be like hanging out in the backyards together. So we can't really like we can do that, but like we can't be in like the same backyard playing some of the games that we played before.
The girls' morale has just been boosted by this. They're able to see each other clearly, talk. They have lunch outside now together. This is from 9 o'clock in the morning now till 8 o'clock at night.
Simon says, do 2 jumping jacks. When I grow up and I tell them, when I have children, what I'll tell them is that there was this big virus and I couldn't see like any of my friends. So then our parents took out a couple of the fences and put in plexiglass. And they'll tell my children that it made me feel really happy. Now Simon says, touch your hips. Now Simon.
That's so cute. I don't know what to say. That is so. She's going to tell her kids it made her really happy.
Yeah, I love it, the creativity that has come out where we've been seeing, so that's really wonderful. Mother Nature can be creative as well, and we're seeing that tonight. Earlier I was saying that I expected that we would see the city added by Environment Canada to the severe thunderstorm watch. It has been now since I was last with you. Mississauga in here as well, York, Durham, so all regions there now in the severe thunderstorm watch. The areas in red are in the warning, and just a reminder, the watch means conditions are favorable for severe storms to develop. The red areas here means they've happened or they are occurring or imminent. And what we're seeing with some of these storms along this cold front that's pushing into our very buoyant, moist, sticky air is that there's some small hail associated up to about loony size that we've been seeing reports of that and seeing pictures back towards the Windsor area as well. But torrential downpours, winds gusting to about 110 or even more than that, but 110 kilometers an hour. And then all the blue and white here, those are all the lightning strikes too. So many reasons that you want to be indoors or in a safe place and take heed of this active weather that we're having. In terms of it tracking now, coming closer to the GTA, we can kind of extrapolate here. They've been moving, they're a little less organized now as they come across the Lake Huron, but moving to the east about 50 kilometers an hour. So taking that into Toronto, we're at about 6:45 now, 7:45, 8:45. Some areas like to the north of the city will get there sooner because you're seeing some of those cells breaking off. And let's see how the model runs with this 6:30, taking us to about 9 o'clock, sure enough, bringing it in. But I do think anywhere after about 8:30, you really, in the city, want to be cautious there because we'll be seeing this coming in. So you still have time to bring things in or be prepared for the winds that are going to be coming through. Cooler air moves in, though, behind this. It will be breezy tomorrow for sure. Those winds still strong out of the west, gusting to 50, 60 kilometers an hour. But it's going to bring the temperatures down from where we're still at 31 degrees at the moment. Humidity, oh, it's there too. It almost feels like 40. We were up to 41 with our Humidex a little bit earlier. So for those of you who are just finding this stifling, well, we got a busy night ahead with some active weather coming towards us, but behind that we will see a much cooler day, more comfortable air. 22 will be the high tomorrow, Dwight.
Thank you, Colette.
You're welcome.
Dozens more migrant workers have tested positive for COVID-19 in the Windsor-Essex region. This after the local health unit gave their teams a list of 130 workers already positive to check on last week. Advocates and experts say the health of these workers remains a priority, but right behind that concern, questions about food security. Chris Ensing explains.
The second day of mass migrant worker testing here in Leamington, with more positive cases announced this morning. Since Monday, 72 people who work in the agri-food sector have tested positive for COVID-19. The majority are migrant workers. 2 migrant workers died in Essex County after contracting the virus. Preventing another death keeps the local medical officer of health awake at night.
My immediate thoughts that's been keeping me awake is to find better ways to support these people and to identify any cases that requires more close monitoring and follow-up.
Provincially, Premier Doug Ford has talked about increased inspections. 34 orders issued by the Ministry of Labour as of June 2nd. 4 at farms in Leamington, 1 in Kingsville, another in Ruthven. Another 4 orders issued in Thamesville. A spokesperson says orders issued to employers included making sure workers are protected, that equipment is properly inspected, and telling employers how they can protect workers. Today, the health unit announced they'll start naming places with outbreaks this week. Janet McLaughlin helped launch a migrant worker health project online.
Unfortunately, I'm not surprised. Many of us who study migrant farm worker health and safety saw this coming. Workers are particularly at risk because they live in congregated housing.
McLaughlin echoes concerns raised in Monday's report by the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. Cramped living spaces, crowded workplaces.
I think that's very important to put it on the radar of politicians because for far too long this group has been largely invisible to most Canadians, and most Canadians are not making this a political issue.
We need to do a better job of protecting temporary agricultural workers in this country, temporary foreign workers in this country.
The head of the health unit wants to see change too, suggesting that the bare minimum isn't enough.
And unfortunately, some of the employers will only provide the basic and will not go beyond, because technically they're meeting the legislative requirement.
Locally, the Ontario Greenhouse Vegetable Growers nonprofit organization are adamant that worker health comes first, but they're worried about the secondary effects. Listen to what almost happened when most of the people working at a grower in Chatham, Kent, contracted COVID-19.
If that crop had failed, you were looking at about $20 to $28 million in revenue losses. So to make that easier to visualize, that's about 790 tractor-trailer loads full of peppers that would have been lost to the food supply chain.
And is that something that's people are concerned about now as we start to see this in the Leamington and Kingsville area?
Absolutely. We have a higher number of greenhouses in this region. And if multiple operations were to see significant workforce shortages, frankly speaking, I don't think we'd be able to access the number of employees that we'd need to care for the crop. So I think we would definitely see losses.
After the break, today's Frontline Hero. Stick around for that. Plus, how one teacher is going the extra mile for his students.
They knew that I would do something goofy, and so I agreed to do this. And it's sort of just a positive way to end this campaign, but also to continue, hopefully, for the students to be doing those kind acts.
Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital helps children diagnosed on the autism spectrum with significant symptoms of anxiety. Now, they run a program called Facing Your Fears, working with children 8 to 12 years old for 14 weeks. But when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, the program had to be put on hold. Martha Pilkington, Ambulatory Services Operations Manager with the hospital, wanted to give a shout out to these 6 healthcare providers who got the program back up and running. 4 are psychologists, 2 are their interns, and Pilkington says recognizing an even greater need to have services for children with anxiety during this time, the staff resumed the groups using Zoom technology. All of the original 9 families were very eager to restart their sessions, and the new format has gone very well. So congratulations at Holland Bloorview. Students at a Toronto school recently challenged themselves to do something during this pandemic. Their goal was to complete 250 acts of kindness. Not only did they complete those acts, but they are now on their way to doing 400 to celebrate their gym teacher biked through their neighborhood today.
So today, since we surpassed our goal of 250 kind acts, our teacher, Mr. Breach, is riding around in a cow costume with his bike around different neighborhoods, and so it's like a celebration of completing our goal.
I told them that if we reached our goal of 250 acts, that I would ride around the neighborhoods of the school, and we made it. We're over 400 acts right now.
I think even though everybody feels kind of lonely, if we can help them, then maybe they'll feel a bit less lonely, and like, you know, there are people out there looking out for them, and yeah, and you know, we give artwork and stuff, so I think that helps with everybody.
Mr. Breach! Mr. Breach! Mr. Breach! Mr. Breach!
Students are the future, and they are already interested in helping others. They are already wanting to do these things, so I'm just there to help them. I'm not the one that came up with all these ideas, the students did, and I just help them facilitate. So they already want to do these things.
I think our children and our students need to learn to lead. They need to learn to be the ones who can make the change in the world, and I think they can do better than what we've done in the past. They can learn from our mistakes. Everybody learns from mistakes, and they can find a way to make the world the one they want to make.
Round of applause for Teach Breach, teaching those young ones some great values, Colette.
Yeah, absolutely love that. Every night we have the greatest stories here. This is what's going on with our weather, though. It's not the greatest because we are looking at some active weather here. So the areas in yellow, and this does include the city of Toronto, it's right around the GTA here, around the Golden Horseshoe and stretching to the north in a watch. So we're waiting for the storms to move in. The conditions are favorable for severe storms. We know that we have those kinds of storms here in the areas in red. That's where the warning is. The only thing is that they're changing their makeup a little bit as they've come across Lake Huron. They're not quite as well organized. Don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean they aren't very strong storms and dangerous. Lots of lightning strikes that we're seeing in here, heavy downpours and wind gusts that exceed 100 kilometers an hour, plus some small hail. All of that coming in through here. Now, I've kind of projected how it's going to be moving here, taking about the leading edge and then pushing it over towards the city. So really coming in here 8 o'clock or just after 8 o'clock. But as I was saying, kind of to the north, as this piece is breaking off, that'll be reaching communities to the north of the city a little bit sooner. So you have a little bit of time here if you do have any hanging plants or things that are outdoors, cushions, anything that you need to bring in, and to get yourselves indoors as well. Now, in terms of the temperatures coming down from, hey, being up to 32 degrees for us today and a humidex value of 41, well, 26. And as the storms come through, you'll see that temperature really dropping. Then overnight, we'll have some residual showers kind of hanging in there, here and there. They'll be spotty in nature. We will be drying out. 18 then overnight, but check out the winds, strong from the southwest. And then tomorrow more westerly, and they will be quite gusty then too. 22 will be the high, and a clearing trend that we're going to get into through the day. So we actually are going to end up tomorrow afternoon in a completely different place with nice temperatures and conditions and the air feeling much drier and more comfortable. And then we go through a period with dry conditions and temperatures actually a little below seasonal, Dwight.
All right, so don't water the grass tonight and get the cushions inside. Thank you,
all
Colette.
of that. You
and
have
get
a little
ourselves
time.
inside too. Thank you,
That's
Colette.
right.
That is our show for tonight. Thank you for joining us. Mike Wise has your next local news tonight at 11, right after the National. Stay safe and have a great night, everybody.